Climate change has been on the forefront of our society's consciousness for years and only continues to gain a more prevalent spot in the conversation of the world's environmental health. Water contamination, fossil fuel emissions, and an uptick in global energy consumption are three of the main issues in the climate change conversation. They exist, no doubt, but why are these things happening? How is our water being contaminated? Why are we burning through so many non-renewable energy sources? And why do we have the need to consume such massive amounts of energy? One of the biggest culprits is fast fashion. Defined by Oxford Dictionary as an inexpensive clothing produced rapidly by mass market retailers in response to the latest trend, fast fashion is a market that dominates clothing production. Almost 88% of clothing made in a year, all clothing made in a year, is fast fashion, meaning that 88% of the clothing we make in a single year is made cheaply, unethically, in a way that is actively harming the environment. In this speech, I will dissect why fast fashion is the largest environmental threat we currently face in the world by evaluating its effect on our water supply, our CO2 emissions, and our global energy consumption. Let us begin a more in-depth assessment of the most valuable resource we have, our water. Water is an absolutely essential part of everyday life and also an absolutely essential part of manufacturing clothing. Every single step requires water. 20% of all global wastewater is from fast fashion. Cotton, the most commonly used material to make clothing, requires an immense amount of water, and as demand for clothing grows, they use pesticides and fertilizers to hurry the life cycle of cotton along. The runoffs from the agrochemical contaminated water pollute nearby water sources, posing threats to local biodiversity and human health. Fabric dyeing and treatment practices generate a good amount of wastewater, and the processing for conventional textiles requires around 100 to 150 liters of water for every kilogram of fiber. Currently, the main source of water pollution is wet processing. Wet processing occurs after textile fibers are spun and woven into fabric. Fabrics are treated with chemicals, dyed, sized, stitched, and or printed on in order to be finished. This stage in textile processing is very water intensive and contaminates surrounding water bodies because it involves the application of a vast number of chemicals and dyes. On average, it takes nearly 8,000 different synthetic chemicals to turn raw materials into a finished product, and excess water is dumped into local waterways. In many of the countries around the world that fast fashion is made in as well, this form of pollution is unregulated and is occurring more frequently than ever. According to the Qantas International 2018 report, it found that the three main drivers of fast fashion's global pollution impacts are dyeing and finishing at 36%, yarn preparation at 28%, and fiber production at 15%. The report also established that fiber production has the largest impact on freshwater withdrawal, water diverted or withdrawn from a surface water or groundwater source, and ecosystem equality due to cotton cultivation has tanked. These are both incredibly energy intensive processes based on fossil fuel energy, which brings me to my second point, that fast fashion is reliant on fossil fuels and is emitting more CO2 than any other industry. Polyester, the most common synthetic fabric that fast fashion is made from petrochemicals, which is a fossil fuel based compound. Another big issue with CO2 is not actually the production of the clothes, but getting rid of them. Clothing companies sit on what is called dead stock. It's pre-consumer waste, which means garments that are not sold or returned and can't be sold, that are thrown in a landfill because it no longer has space on the shelves. The removal of dead stock uses a lot of energy, and the material, water, and chemicals used to make the garments are wholly wasted. Many fast fashion companies have billions of dollars of dead stock at the end of the year, which typically is burned to reduce the amount of physical space it takes up. Even though the plants that it's burned at help convert waste into energy. It emits an immense amount of greenhouse gases and pollutes the environment, both air and water. 75% of energy demand over the garment life cycle occurs prior to retail sale. And the supply chain required to make one singular garment requires 10 times more energy to produce one garment than it does to produce one sheet of glass. Due to ever-increasing apparel demand and population growth, this industry's carbon footprint will only grow bigger. As attention on sustainability issues in our world intensifies, research on environmental sustainability in the apparel manufacturing industry is needed. The sector's emissions are to rise by more than 60% by 2023, if not transformed to a sustainable fashion industry. Although the textile and energy or apparel industry is not considered an energy-intensive energy per se, it's compromised of a large number of plants that together consume a significant amount of energy, which in turn results in a substantial amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Manufacturing hubs in China and India will increase that footprint further if they are not regulated. More than 60% of all textiles used in the clothing industry and a large portion of clothing manufacturing occurs in China and India, countries which rely on coal-fueled power. Electricity, aside from coal, is one of the most commonly used types of energy and one of the key cost factors in the supply chain. The International Energy Agency estimates that final energy consumption in the fast fashion clothing supply chain doubled between the years of 1971 and 2004. The incomprehensible scale of the fashion industry and the sheer quantity of fabrics that are produced for clothing each year is what makes the fashion industry so destructive. We cannot visualize the problem, so we do not realize it. Electricity is needed to run machinery such as sewing machines and air pumps in textile factories. Huge amounts of heat is needed for washing, drying, and dyeing the cloth. These are just some of the factors that go into the incredibly high production or incredibly high consumption of energy in fast fashion. Fast fashion is the biggest environmental threat facing us because it affects the most crucial aspects of our life, from our water to our air quality, which if we destroy both of those things, there's not really any getting them back. As the consumers and not the makers, we cannot fully grasp the scope of the damage. To do that, we must turn to the countries where fast fashion bases itself and look at the poison in their water, their air, and the unprecedented amount of energy they use. But is there hope for us? Yes, if we turn to more sustainable and ethical production and consumption practices. This means regulating countries that are not incredibly regulated in terms of their environmental as well as their labor laws as well, so that they're a little bit more on par with, say, our labor laws and our environmental laws, which are incredibly strict. You can also buy secondhand clothing. The wastewater created from a garment and the pollution created from a garment is never going to go away. It happened, it already exists. However, you can help negate the further, explanation of water and CO2 emissions by buying secondhand. You're zeroing out that garment's carbon footprint and giving it a new life. Because of its detrimental impacts on our water cleanliness, its very high emission of CO2, and large consumption of energy, fast fashion is the largest environmental threat that we currently face. We are living in the midst of what could possibly destroy our planet, and we need to be incredibly aware and incredibly dedicated to reversing the damage that has already been done and preventing new damage.